Welcome to Sherlock Shallow Channel, where every story hides a secret. Grab your coffee, sit back, and dive into a world of twists and turns. Tell us where you're watching from. Drop your city and country in the comments. Like, subscribe, and share the thrill with fellow mystery lovers. Let the adventure begin. Hercule Poirot and the Riddle of the Composer's Silence. Chapter 1. The Inciting Incident. I have known Hercule Poirot for many years. As a chronicler of his exploits, I have borne witness to marvels of deduction that would astonish the stoutest heart. Yet even I, Captain Arthur Hastings, was unprepared for the curious affair that unfolded on that crisp autumn evening at Thornwood Hall, where music and silence conspired to conceal a heinous crime. The evening air was sharp, with the promise of frost, when I arrived at the venerable estate of Lord and Lady Mirabell. Thornwood Hall stood on a rise overlooking the silver ribbon of the Avon. Its Georgian facade was softly illuminated by lanterns swinging in the chill wind. Lady Mirabell, a former prima donna of the London Opera, now presided over a yearly soirée in honor of her dear friend, the celebrated composer Roland Cabot. It was an event whispered about in musical circles and society columns alike, a gathering where the highest echelons of art and aristocracy intertwined. Poirot was already ensconced in the oak-panelled drawing-room, seated beside a bronze bust of Apollo, his beady eyes gleaming beneath his signature moustaches as he surveyed the arrival of the guests. His devotion to order was evident. Coats and gloves arranged on an adjacent sofa, a small measuring tape in hand, with which he had assured the symmetry of every cushion. I tiptoed in, mindful of his disdain for unexpected intrusions. "Mon ami, Hastings," he exclaimed, rising with theatrical courtesy. "You arrive like a metronome belated in its beat. But come, observe." He swept a hand toward the grand staircase, at the foot of which two uniformed footmen stood rigid as sentinels. At the top, a gallery overlooked the entrance hall. Beyond that, the glowing doorway of the music salon invited a select few to witness Cabot's latest composition. "I confess, Poirot," I replied, hanging my coat, "I find all this fuss rather unnecessary. A private performance. One might think the piece was of world-shattering importance." "Precisely, my friend," Poirot murmured, his thin lips curling into a smile. "And when something, or someone, claims great importance, one must be alert to the possibility of danger. But let us not digress. Have yourself a glass of claret, and attend to the prelude." The music salon was a vast chamber whose high windows looked out upon moonlit gardens. A grand Steinway stood center stage, flanked by a quartet of string players, their instruments gleaming under the candelabra. The guests settled, diplomats, actresses, aristocrats, each wearing masks of polite anticipation. At the rear, I noted a solitary figure, Maestro Roland Cabot himself. He leaned against a marble pillar, his normally vigorous frame now gaunt, dark circles under his eyes betraying exhaustion. His glance swept the audience, as though committing every face to memory. At precisely 8 o'clock, the quartet began the opening movement, an elegant yet melancholic theme, soon joined by the pianissimo chords of the Steinway. Poirot's head bobbed rhythmically, his small grey cells weaving through the harmonies, no doubt anticipating the compositional trick Cabot had promised. I, however, focused on the maestro. His fingers drummed nervously against the pillar, and every so often his gaze flicked to a small mahogany box on a nearby table. The prelude concluded in hushed awe, and as the last note trembled into silence, a hush of reverence fell. I rose to applaud, yet the other guests remained motionless, enthralled by the unfolding drama. Suddenly the hush cracked. A cry, pure, terrified, rang out from the gallery above. Poirot's eyes snapped upward. In an instant he was at my side. "Hastings, come," he commanded. We dashed up the broad staircase 2 steps at a time. As we reached the landing, the scene that confronted us was like a tableau of horror and confusion. At the far end of the gallery lay Lady Mirabell's niece, Miss Celia Ashworth, sprawled on the Persian runner, her evening gown stained with a spreading pool of blood. The guests pressed back, their faces pale beneath the lamplight. 2 ladies gasped, their evening fans fluttering like wounded birds. A footman knelt beside her, trembling as he applied a silk handkerchief to the wound in her side. Her eyes were closed, her breathing shallow. I bent to ascertain the cause. A slender stiletto lay on the carpet, its blade dark with crimson. Celia's lips parted in a final, gasping plea. "Help me," she whispered. Then, with a convulsive shudder, she was still. Poirot flicked aside a lock of graying hair and surveyed the scene with icy precision. "The handkerchief ring a bell?" he asked me quietly. I shrugged. I had not noticed. He plucked the silk from the footman's grasp. Embroidered in silver thread were the initials R.C. Roland. Cabot. The maestro's box, I realized with a jolt, contained something of vital importance. The original manuscript of his new concerto, the very work whose silence we had just admired. Poirot's dark eyes glowed. "There is our first mystery, Hastings. Why did this silken emblem, the very hallmark of the composer's creation, appear here at such a moment?" He turned to the assembled guests. "Messieurs and mesdames, remain where you are. One among you has stained a noble work with blood." As an officer of the local constabulary burst into the gallery, pale of face, notebook at the ready, Poirot assumed his accustomed pose. He pressed the silk against his nose, inhaled, and gently closed his eyes. Around him, the lamp flames flickered, casting grotesque shadows upon the walls. I stood back, heart pounding, and reflected on the events of the evening. A composer's triumph had been silenced by a cry of mortal terror. Beneath the elegance of Thornwood Hall lay a tangled web of secrets, of love and jealousy, and, most sinister of all, motive. And at its center stood Hercule Poirot, ready with his little grey cells to untangle every thread. Thus, under the watchful eyes of candlelight and candelabra, began the affair at Hercule Poirot and the riddle of the composer's silence. Little did I know then how deep the composer's secret would run, nor how many among us harbored a darker tune than any orchestral score. Chapter 2. The First Clues. The dawn following the dreadful events at Thornwood Hall was grey and mist-laden, as though the heavens themselves wished to veil the horror that had transpired. I arrived at the gallery before breakfast, summoned by Hercule Poirot's urgent telegram. The corridors were hushed and cold, only a brave but composed. In one hand he held the composer's monogrammed handkerchief, now carefully sealed in a paper envelope. In the other, a slender magnifying glass. His keen eyes shone with excitement, tempered by solemn duty. "Mon ami," he greeted me crisply. "We have work to do. Yesterday's shock must not obscure the task of investigation. You shall assist me." I nodded, still shaken. As we ascended the stairs together, I noted that the guests, Lady Mirabell, Lord Archibald, the actress Helena Montague, the financier Sir Rupert Vance, and the spy-master Colin Marchant, stood clustered in the adjacent drawing-room, pale-faced and whispering among themselves. Their murmurings fell silent as we appeared. Each bowed with forced civility, eyes darting warily. Poirot held up a gloved finger. Not yet, s'il vous plaît. First, we examined the scene. We stepped into the gallery. The spot where Miss Celia Ashworth had collapsed was marked by a circle of chalk, a precaution the local constable had taken before removing her body late last night. The carpet fibres near the wound were matted down, but Poirot's magnifying glass revealed minute specks of glittering dust that caught the early light. "Tell me, Hastings," Poirot said in his measured tone, "what do you observe?" I crouched beside him and peered closely at the floor. "Fragments of what looked like metallic powder, sir." "Precisely." Poirot smiled. "Not blood, but powdered metal. Palladium, perhaps, used as a fine abrasive in polishing instruments. Why would it be here?" He tapped the floor with the tip of his cane. "Moreover, note the absence of footprints aside from those of Celia and the footman who attempted aid. This suggests the assailant was careful, perhaps wearing overshoes, or exited via the gallery's rear door." I followed his gaze to a side panel in the wall. A narrow corridor lay beyond, its door slightly ajar. Through it ran a servant's passage leading back to the kitchens. Poirot strode toward it. "Let us see where this leads." We passed through the door into a dim passage lined with framed family portraits. Lady Mirabelle's delicate features in oil seemed to watch us. Somewhere beyond, the echo of the soft sob reached our ears. Poirot held back the sobbing sound, like a conductor stifling an unruly instrument. At the corridor's end we found the rear service door, locked from the outside. Poirot produced a small brass key, one he had filched from the footman's pocket the previous evening, and opened it silently. Beyond lay the kitchen yard, where the morning mist curled around the base of a weathered statue of Bacchus. No footprints crossed the dew-wet tiles, save for those of the kitchen maid, who now peered at us with red-rimmed eyes. "Any unusual occurrences last night, Mary?" Poirot inquired, addressing her by name. She swallowed. "I heard a faint thud, sir, just before the scream. I thought perhaps something had fallen in the scullery. Then I saw the guests rushing and the lights dimming." "Faint thud," Poirot repeated thoughtfully. Hastings recalled the report that the chandelier flickered as the quartet finished the prelude. "An electrical fault," they said. "A fault conveniently blamed on faulty wiring," I suggested. Poirot's moustaches twitched. "Indeed. We shall return to that thought. For now, the metallic powder. It did not belong upon the Persian runner, yet here it lies. Our unknown murderer left it deliberately, and likely to mislead." We retraced our steps to the gallery. Poirot directed me to inspect the mahogany box that had contained the composer's concerto manuscript. It still stood upon a pedestal table, its lid ajar. Inside, the ivory pages of music were scattered, some missing. I picked up a page and saw that its bottom right corner had been torn away, as though to remove an annotation. "See here," I said, handing it to Poirot. He examined the fragment under his magnifying glass, an editorial remark by Cabot himself. Ad lib. The removal of that corner suggests the perpetrator feared the margin contained something incriminating. But what? A personal note? A secret dedication? A rustle behind us turned our attention to Lady Mirabelle, pale but resolute. "Might I be permitted to say, Monsieur Poirot, that my niece was entrusted with the safekeeping of that manuscript all evening," she said, her voice trembling. "Miss Ashworth had instructions from Roland himself to guard it. If any page is missing—" "The list of entrusted pages," Poirot interjected. "Do you possess such a list, madame?" Lady Mirabelle faltered. I thought so, but I cannot find it. I had it here." She jabbed a trembling finger at the table, then bit her lip. "It's gone." Poirot's head tilted. "Madame, a missing list and missing pages cannot be mere coincidence." "Hastings, do you recall the banker, Sir Rupert Vance, mentioning a proposed loan to Maestro Cabot? Perhaps negotiations were noted in the margin of that manuscript." Sir Rupert, standing nearby, stiffened. "I did propose a loan, yes, but no annotations were made by me. I have never touched his manuscript." Poirot turned on him with that peculiar intensity of his. "Yet someone has removed that annotation, Sir Rupert, and someone has erased something from the music itself. The question is not who touched the manuscript, but why." Before Sir Rupert could reply, the officious constable entered, carrying a bundle of evidence in small paper bags. He handed them to Poirot, who accepted them with grave courtesy. "Your papers, Inspector. Tell me what you have gathered." The inspector cleared his throat. "We have found the weapon, the stiletto, washed and hidden beneath a hedge in the garden. It's been wiped clean, save for traces of that same metallic powder. Also, we recovered the composer's penknife, engraved with the initials R.C. It was hidden in the conservatory among the ferns." Poirot's lips curved upward. "Hidden, yes, yet not hidden enough. The powder was used to obscure blood, but it reveals how thorough our criminal is. He or she knows the conservatory well, and the gardens better still." He paused to let this sink in. The assembled guests exchanged apprehensive glances. Poirot then produced a small packet of wax paper. From it he withdrew a scrap of yellowed vellum, nearly translucent with age. "Finally," he announced, "Celia Ashworth's personal diary page." The guests recoiled, as though the very mention of a diary was sacrilege. She recorded a strange meeting with someone only referred to as the maestro's confidant. The entry hints at blackmail and betrayal, but the name is smudged, likely by a tear, but just as likely by design. Lord Archibald, frost upon his eyebrows, cleared his throat. "My niece was a young lady of discretion. She would not involve herself in any scandal." "Hastings," Poirot said quietly, "do you recall Miss Ashworth's discovery of a second letter in the composer's studio last night? She said it was not in Cabot's handwriting, but she would not disclose, and the missing pages were likely to carry clues to its author." He straightened, his little grey cells visibly at work. "We have dust and powder, torn manuscript and diary, a missing list and a secret letter. All point to a conspiracy, rather than a lone madman. Hastings, we must question each suspect anew, focusing on their knowledge of these materials. And we must discover who in this room benefited most from Miss Ashworth's silence." As the morning mist lifted beyond the gallery windows, it seemed that Thornwood Hall, for all its grandeur, had become a prison of secrets and suspicion. And at the heart of it stood Hercule Poirot, resolute and unflappable, determined to tease out the contradictions that would lead him ever closer to the killer. Chapter 3. The Gathering of Suspects. By mid-morning, Thornwood Hall had taken on the oppressive stillness of a place under quarantine. The grand drawing-room, where Lady Mirabelle had hosted luncheon, now served as a secure meeting place. Heavy velvet drapes were drawn against the chill light, and the mahogany table, once set with fine china and crystal, stood cleared save for a silver inkstand and sheets of plain writing paper, tools Poirot would soon employ in his methodical unravelling of truth. I entered alongside Hercule Poirot, my heart still heavy from the loss of young Celia Ashworth. Standing before us were the principal guests of the fatal evening, each summoned at Poirot's behest. Lady Mirabelle in her pearl-grey gown, her face composed, but her eyes betraying raw anxiety. Lord Archibald, adjusting his cufflinks as if to ward off his own tremors. Helena Montague, the celebrated actress with her cloak draped over one shoulder, her auburn hair coiled into a perfect chignon. Sir Rupert Vance, whose banker's countenance remained inscrutable, and Colin Marchant, the reticent former intelligence officer whose gaze flicked from one face to another as though seeking a traitor in the ranks. A footman stood at the door, ready to admit or exclude on Poirot's signal. Poirot took his customary seat of authority at the head of the table. He placed the composer's monogrammed handkerchief in front of him, alongside the scrap of diary vellum and the torn music page, all now sealed in protective wax paper. "Mesdames, Messieurs," he began, his baroque accent trimming each word like a precisely cut gem. "We are met to determine who among you wished to silence Miss Ashworth, and by extension, to conceal the secrets she uncovered." He paused to let the gravity of his charge settle upon them. I observed each suspect's reaction. Lady Mirabel's lips pursed, Lord Archibald's posture stiffened, Helena's emerald eyes widened, Sir Rupert's jaw clenched imperceptibly, and Marchant's thin lips twitched as though he fought the urge to speak. Poirot nodded approvingly at these subtle giveaways. "First," he said, "I shall invite you, one by one, to relate your movements and your relationship to the material in question, the composer's manuscript, Miss Ashworth's diary, and the concealed letter we suspect motivated her murder." He drew a slender envelope from his waistcoat pocket. "Here, the diary excerpt mentions the maestro's confidant. Who among you has corresponded with Roland Cabot in secret?" Lady Mirabel spoke first, her voice steady, though her hands trembled. "My dear friend Roland and I have corresponded, but always openly, through my secretary. Any private letters Miss Ashworth discovered would not have been entrusted to her without my knowledge." She steadied herself with a breath. Celia admired him as a godmother might admire her child's hero. She would never have meddled in affairs beyond her station. "Ah," Poirot murmured, "but admiration can inspire audacity." He turned to Lord Archibald, the girl's uncle. "We know Miss Ashworth spent hours in the composer's studio. You, Lord Archibald, granted her permission, as head of the family, to oversee the security of the concerto. What did you think she was guarding?" Archibald shifted uncomfortably. "The family's reputation, monsieur. Lord Mirabel and I invested considerable sums in Cabot's project. We expected the final score before royalty and critics. If Miss Ashworth had seen a letter threatening to reveal financial irregularities, she might have feared public disgrace. So you acknowledge that the manuscript contained more than mere notes, that it held documentary evidence?" Poirot's query was gentle, yet relentless. Archibald hesitated, then nodded. "Perhaps, but doubtless the matter was between Cabot and his financiers, not for a young lady's eyes." Celia was naive. Helena Montague was next. She leaned forward, porcelain complexion flushed. "I had little to do with the manuscript itself, Monsieur Poirot, but I did speak with Miss Ashworth after the performance. She claimed to have discovered a footnote in the margin, something referencing a betrayal urgent. She was shaken, but begged me not to inquire further." She covered her mouth with a gloved hand. She seemed frightened. "Yet you did not warn her against further investigation?" Poirot asked, arching an eyebrow. Helena's gaze fell. "I thought it best not to alarm her unduly. Young ladies are prone to dramatics." Sir Rupert Vance, tall and austere, answered only when addressed. "I have most certainly corresponded with Cabot regarding financing. I insisted on a guarantee in writing he supply the completed score by September. But in that contract there was no clause that concerned personal matters. nor did I write any threatening letter. Yet Miss Ashworth spoke of blackmail, Poirot observed. He laid the torn music page before Sir Rupert. This page seems to have concealed something, perhaps a note of extortion. Is it possible, Sir Rupert, that you sought to compel the maestro to repay in some other manner his debts to you? Sir Rupert's gaze flashed. I am a man of business, monsieur. If the maestro did not fulfill his end of the bargain, I would claim damages. But I would never resort to blackmail, nor would I hide clauses in his artistic manuscript. At this point, Colin Marchant cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention. My involvement with Cabot was limited to security advice. He feared someone might attempt theft of his original score. I advised on a locking mechanism for the studio door and the installation of an alarm. His expression was inscrutable, but his hands were clasped so tightly the knuckles shone white. I knew Miss Ashworth had a key, yes, but only because she served as custodian. Beyond that, I have no connection to any letter or diary entry. Poirot steepled his fingers. So we have Lady Mirabelle, who claims ignorance of any clandestine letter. Lord Archibald, who may have feared financial scandal. Helena Montague, who witnessed Celia's distress. Sir Rupert Vance, whose business dealings could have turned sour. And Colin Marchant, who provided security counsel. All stand to suffer if secrets become public. He paused, surveying the group. But observe how each of you describes Miss Ashworth's knowledge as incidental. Page was found in her room, hastily torn and smudged. Only a few words remain legible. Betrayal urgent. Meet at midnight. Trust none but R.C. Note that R.C. could refer to Roland Cabot, yet the final words seem penned in a hand not his own. Who among you writes with such spidery script? He passed the vellum around for close inspection. The guests bent forward, murmuring. Lady Mirabelle's brow furrowed as she examined the looping letters. Helena pursed her lips. Lord Archibald looked away. Sir Rupert traced a finger along a curl of ink. Marchant's eyes narrowed. Poirot took back the note and smoothed it against the table. We shall require handwriting samples, he declared. Each suspect will write a short note in this ledger under my supervision. We will learn who among you might have threatened the maestro, or who feared that he, R.C., would betray you. I watched as Poirot produced a leather-bound notebook and passed it to Lady Mirabelle. She dipped the pen in ink, her hand trembling as she copied a simple line. I trust in art, not blackmail. One by one, each suspect complied, the scratch of quill on paper punctuating the thick atmosphere. When the last signature dried, Poirot collected the notebook. Very good. We now understand who had motive, opportunity, and the means to manipulate both musical manuscripts and human hearts. He paused for effect, then glanced at me. Hastings, fetch the inspector and our samples to the study. We shall compare these quietly while I prepare the first round of individual interviews. No one leaves this room until I summon you. As the suspects exchanged uneasy glances, Poirot rose. His tall silhouette cast long shadows against the drapes, a solitary figure poised to unveil truth from beneath layers of deception. I followed him from the drawing-room, clutching the ledger, pondering which script would reveal the hand that held the stiletto and the secret letter that spelled betrayal entwined with melody. Chapter 4. Poirot arrives. The late afternoon sun slanted through the arched windows of Thornwood Hall's library, painting amber rectangles upon the rows of leather-bound tomes. Here, amid the musty scent of old paper and polished wood, Hercule Poirot held court with Inspector Simmons of the local constabulary. The inspector, A stout man in a rumpled coat clutched a folder of reports as though it were a life-preserver against the storm of riddles Poirot's little grey cells had already summoned. "Monsieur Poirot," the inspector began, clearing his throat, "the evidence points unambiguously to the footman, James. He was found near the scene, his gloves stained with Miss Ashworth's blood. Although washed, traces remained. He possessed no alibi for the critical minutes after the prelude. Under questioning, he broke and admitted to striking her in a moment of panic when she confronted him for stealing a page of the manuscript." Poirot tapped the rim of his teacup thoughtfully. "Panic, you say? And what page did the footman claim to have stolen?" His voice, courteous but incisive, caused the inspector to shuffle papers. "An unnumbered page, sir." He could not specify. He flailed under pressure and confessed, believing that by admitting guilt he would escape suspicion in other quarters. "Ah, but there is the rub," Poirot said gently. He stood, smoothing his waistcoat. "If our footman acted alone, then why conceal the weapon in the garden and the penknife in the conservatory? Why smudge the diary page, and why remove only those manuscript corners that bore marginalia? Monsieur Simmons, the crime bears all the hallmarks of a carefully orchestrated theatre, not the caprice of a frightened servant." The inspector's bushy eyebrows rose. "You believe the footman was framed?" "I am certain of it." Poirot swept his gaze across the cluttered shelves. "But let us not dwell on hypothesis. I have now arrived in full measure upon this investigation. Permit me, please, to meet with the suspects once more. I shall dissolve their alibis as one might stir honey into tea." He bowed slightly. "May I borrow your assistance in assembling them?" Moments later, Poirot and I led the suspects into the library. They exchanged strained glances, as though the very walls whispered of betrayal. Lady Mirabelle stood by a window, clutching her gloves. Lord Archibald hovered near the fireplace. Helena Montague leaned against a carved oak armchair. Sir Rupert Vance paced with banker's precision, and Colin Marchant remained impassive, arms folded. Poirot motioned them to sit in a semicircle. He produced the silver handkerchief, the scrap of vellum, and the torn music page, laying them gently upon a mahogany table. "We resume our inquiry," he announced. "I have met with Inspector Simmons and find it necessary to amend our approach. The official theory is unsatisfactory. Instead, allow me to observe each of you once more." He began with Lady Mirabelle. "Madame, I noted yesterday that you kept your hands clasped tightly. Now you cradle your gloves as if they were talismans. Tell me, what was your precise reaction upon learning of your niece's death?" Lady Mirabelle's voice wavered. "I was devastated. She was my only family." "Indeed. Yet when I first questioned you, your composure was near statuesque. Do you not think genuine grief would render one more turbulent?" Poirot's gaze softened, but his words struck like steel. She swallowed, adjusting a pearl necklace. "I have learned over many years that outward composure serves as a shield. Inside, I was unmade." "Perhaps," Poirot conceded. "Or perhaps you knew too well the consequences of emotional display in this house, where appearances are everything." He turned to Lord Archibald. "You, uncle, what emotions did you feel upon discovering Miss Ashworth's body?" Archibald flushed. "Horror, of course." "And yet," Poirot observed, "as you stood over her, I saw your right hand brush the console table, an unconscious gesture perhaps, but one of irritation rather than grief. Why such impatience with tragedy?" Archibald blinked. I was angry at the murderer, monsieur." "Or at your niece for discovering the missing pages," Poirot suggested. his moustaches twitching. Archibald bristled. She was foolish to meddle in matters beyond her station. It was her duty to hand over any documents to me directly. Duty, Poirot mused, a convenient cloak for control. Next came Helena Montague. Poirot invited her to recite a passage from the diary scrap, as though it were lines in a play. She obeyed, her voice trembling with rehearsed restraint. "Yet," Poirot said when she paused, "you hesitated before the word betrayal." Your throat tightened. "Do you fear betrayal yourself, or do you fear that Miss Ashworth uncovered yours?" Helena's emerald eyes glistened. "I have secrets, like everyone, but I am no murderer." "Secrets, yes," Poirot agreed, "but not of the fatal kind. Unless the threat she uncovered can ever hide clauses in his artistic work." "Yet someone did," Poirot said quietly, "and that someone knew the maestro well enough to mimic his script, yet poorly enough to leave telltale inconsistencies. Your signature in the ledger was precise. This scrap is scrawled with tremors." Sir Rupert's jaw tightened. "Imply what you will, monsieur, but I am no forger." Finally, Poirot faced Colin Marchant. He produced the sample of Marchant's handwriting and laid it beside the vellum. "Examine these side by side." Marchant leaned in. "The styles differ, but both hands share a flourish on the letter T. I taught myself to write elegantly in my youth." "And yet," Poirot said, "the diary scrap betrays one who writes in haste and fear, not in practiced calm." He studied Marchant's narrowed eyes. "You advised on the lock and alarm. Surely you designed the very mechanism that failed during the prelude. That failure was no accident, was it?" Marchant's steel-grey gaze flickered. "I tested the alarm thoroughly. If it failed, it was beyond my control." "Yet it failed at the precise moment the murder occurred," Poirot pointed out. "Convenient, would you not say?" A hush fell. The suspects exchanged glances, as though each sought refuge in another's gaze. Poirot steepled his fingers. "Mes amis, evidence is not merely physical. It resides in the human heart. I observe that your statements today betray faint tremors of guilt and resentment. But these are not enough to condemn. We require proof, not impression." He rose and retrieved the torn manuscript page. Holding it aloft, he continued, "This fragment contained more than musical notation. I have had it subjected to chemical analysis. It revealed traces of a rare violet ink, unlike the maestro's customary black. Violet ink, found only in Lady Mirabelle's study. Does that surprise you, madame?" Lady Mirabelle paled, her gloves slipping from her clasp. "I use violet for personal notes," she admitted, "but I would not mark the maestro's music with it." "Yet someone did," Poirot said softly. "Our murderer is someone who could access both your study and the composer's manuscript. And who knew that Miss Ashworth guarded both?" He turned to the group. "Tomorrow I shall examine Lady Mirabelle's desk. We shall inspect Sir Rupert's contract files. We shall test the alarm mechanism in the conservatory, and we shall revisit the footman's testimony. The true culprit will emerge, not from a trembling footman, but from among you, who had motive, opportunity, and cunning." He fixed each suspect with a steady look, then bowed. "Until then, reflect upon your words and deeds. For tonight, Thornwood Hall is no longer a haven of art and elegance, but a stage upon which the final act draws near." With that, Poirot swept from the library, leaving behind a swirl of tension and unanswered questions. I followed, my mind racing. The false confession, the mismatched ink, the failed alarm, all pieces of a puzzle whose edges would soon snap into place under the relentless scrutiny of Hercule Poirot's little grey cells. Chapter 5. Initial interviews begin that evening after a terse dinner in which conversation hovered like a wary bird. Poirot summoned each suspect individually to the music salon. The quartet's instruments lay silent on the stage, their hunger for sound replaced by an air of apprehension. I remained as Hastings, observing from the sidelines and taking notes for my friend's benefit, though often I sensed that my scribbles did little more than amuse him. The first to enter was Lady Mirabelle. She glided in, her posture regal, though a tremor in her gloved hands betrayed her composure. Poirot sat at center stage, the composer's monogrammed handkerchief and the torn manuscript page arranged before him like talismans of truth. "Madame," Poirot began, his voice as smooth as polished marble, "thank you for joining me. I wish to revisit your study, where I understand you compose your own verse in violet ink." Lady Mirabelle inclined her head. "Of course, Monsieur Poirot. My writing desk is directly off the gallery. May I fetch you lamp and chair?" "No," he replied. "We shall proceed here. Tell me, madam, did anyone enter your study uninvited on the night of the performance?" She hesitated, glancing at the silent quartet behind her. "Not to my knowledge. The only key, besides mine, was held by Miss Ashworth. She delivered my personal letters each evening." "Precisely," Poirot said. "And yet our chemical analysis detected traces of the violet ink upon the torn music page." He tapped the manuscript fragment. "Do you recall placing that fragment upon your desk for safekeeping?" Lady Mirabelle's eyes widened. I may have laid it there for safe storage. I often review the score before dinner, but I would never tear it, nor would I smudge it with my ink." "Then someone did, madame," Poirot observed. "Someone who had access to your study, and who knew that Celia Ashworth would guard both your letters and the maestro's pages. Was there any friction between you and your niece in recent days?" Lady Mirabelle pressed her lips together. She grew distant. "I found her in tears one afternoon, clutching the manuscript. She refused to explain. I assumed— no, I begged her to confide, but she said it concerned matters too grave to share." "And grave indeed it was," Poirot murmured. "I thank you, madam." He stood and opened the door, ushering Lady Mirabelle back to the corridor where the footman waited. She passed him wordless, her face pale under the lamplight. Next came Lord Archibald, whose flourishing moustache had once seemed a charming affectation. Now it quivered with unease. He took the stage with cautious strides. "Lord Archibald," Poirot said, "you maintain that your niece's discoveries threatened your family's investments. Yet you also insisted upon a confidential ledger, now missing, in which she recorded any anomalies she observed. Where is this ledger?" Archibald swallowed. Celia misplaced it, or so she said. I assumed she carried it to her room for study. Yet the page of her diary we recovered bore no reference to a ledger, only to a letter, and the warning, "Trust none but R.C." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "You stand to lose far more than money, if such things came to light." "My reputation, yes," Archibald admitted, "but not my freedom. I would never hurt her." "Conscience is a delicate thing, n'est-ce pas?" Poirot replied. "Tell me, did you ever question her about the identity of R.C.?" Archibald's knuckles whitened. "I asked, gently. She refused to tell me. She was afraid." "Fear can be a powerful deterrent," Poirot observed. "Yet she died, rather than divulge." He studied Archibald's wavering gaze. "Very well, my lord. That will be all, for now." Lord Archibald bowed stiffly and exited. His footsteps echoed down the corridor, leaving behind a scent of aged tobacco and old money. Helen, you did not warn her against further pursuit. Why? Helena's eyelids fluttered. I feared telling her would only make her more determined. She had the temperament of a detective, you see, curious and indomitable. Indomitable, yes, but also vulnerable, Poirot said gently. Did you yourself ever suspect someone else of betrayal? Did you fear that by warning her, you might expose your own secret? Helena's lips parted in a faint gasp. She closed them again. I had letters from a rival company of my own, threatening to publish scandalous memoirs if I did not sever ties with a certain producer. Cabot had offered discreet assistance. He composed a score for my new play. Miss Ashworth may have discovered those letters among the maestro's papers. Poirot nodded. So you used the maestro's confidence to shield your own. He paused. Did you send any letter, mademoiselle, making threats in violet ink? Helena's cheeks flamed. No, monsieur. I would never sully his music with my troubles. Perhaps not, Poirot mused. But you might have taken, unwisely, a page to examine privately, and you might have made threats not in ink, but in voice. Helena trembled. Poirot inclined his head. That will suffice. Sir Rupert Vance was next, tall, austere, and impeccably dressed. He strode in, clutching the contract folder as though it were a shield. Sir Rupert, Poirot began, I have perused your financing agreements. You insisted upon penalties for late delivery. I also note that one clause, handwritten in violet ink, was added after our death of Miss Ashworth. How do you explain that? Sir Rupert's calm mask slipped. That was added by the maestro himself at my request. He desired clarity on his obligations. In violet ink, Poirot echoed, an unusual choice. He had a penchant for color, Sir Rupert replied stiffly. Nothing more. Poirot fixed him with a steady stare. I will need to inspect your correspondence. He made a note. Thank you. Finally, Colin Marchant entered. He moved with the precision of a soldier, closing the door behind him with crisp efficiency. Colonel, pardon, Monsieur Marchant, Poirot said. You installed the alarm mechanism that failed at the moment of the murder. How did that come to pass? Marchant's jaw clenched. The wiring was faulty, as I warned the housekeeper. The fuses were old. And you replaced none of them? Poirot pressed. You recommended only cosmetic repairs. The budget, Marchant said. My services were pro bono in many respects. I advised improvements, but the estate declared them too costly. Poirot examined him. And yet you personally tested the alarm on the eve of the concert. Marchant's gaze dropped. Yes, it worked then. And yet, at 8 o'clock, it fell silent. Poirot leaned forward. Monsieur, was your concern truly for the estate's safety or for some larger design? Marchant's eyes flashed. I served the security of my country for years. I will not serve whispers and insinuations. Poirot inclined his head. Certainly, that will do. As each suspect left the salon, Poirot leaned back in his chair. The empty bench and silent quartet seemed to mourn the weight of unspoken truths. He steepled his fingers and gazed upward. Hastings, he called, bring me the footman's gloves and the diary scrap. We shall compare them. I stepped forward, placing the evidence upon the piano lid. Poirot held the violet-tinged fragment against the gloves, then against the palm of the footman's glove, still faintly stained with blood and a curious residue of metallic powder. "Aha," he murmured. "The powder adheres unevenly to these fibers, yet the violet ink resists. Our killer tread lightly upon your garden path, but boldly scrawled in color. Now we know more. The murderer is someone neither footman nor maid." but one of the privileged few who dared transpose pen to page in this house. He looked at me, eyes alight. "Tomorrow, Hastings, we continue with the study, the contract files, and the conservatory. We shall draw closer to the murderer, step by step, until no secret remains. For now, rest. The little grey cells will not slumber." Chapter 6. First False Lead. The sun rose pale and tentative over Thornwood Hall the following morning, as though even the dawn hesitated to dispel the shadows cast by Miss Celia Ashworth's death. I arrived at the library just as Inspector Simmons prepared to present his findings. The suspects had been summoned once more, and this time the weight of official procedure pressed heavily upon them. Poirot stood behind the long table, his posture immaculate, the evidence before him arranged like instruments on a surgeon's tray. The composer's handkerchief lay beside the torn manuscript page. The scrap of vellum, the footman's gloves, and a folded linen napkin stained faintly with violet ink completed the tableau. Around the room, Lady Mirabell, Lord Archibald, Helena Montague, Sir Rupert Vance, and Colin Marchant watched with faces drawn tight. Even the footman, James, stood at attention by the door, his uniform pristine, but for the tremor in his hands. Inspector Simmons cleared his throat and stepped forward. "Monsieur Poirot, ladies and gentlemen," he began, flipping open a leather-bound notebook. "We have now established a coherent sequence of events. The weapon used to kill Miss Ashworth, the stiletto, was traced to James here. His fingerprints were found on the hilt, and traces of his glove fibers matched those on the handle." He nodded toward the footman, who blinked as though waking from a nightmare. James swallowed. I didn't mean to kill her, sir," he stammered. "She caught me taking a page of the manuscript. I only meant to stop her from finding out I'd been stealing scraps of music for the public-house orchestra. She screamed, and I panicked." A murmur rippled through the assembled guests. Lady Mirabell pressed her gloved hands to her lips. Helena Montague's eyes filled with tears. Sir Rupert's jaw clenched. Marchant's face remained stony, and Lord Archibald exhaled as though relieved. Inspector Simmons continued. "We also found the violet-inked napkin in the footman's quarters, stained with the same metal powder used to mask the blood on the runner, suggesting the footman attempted to clean the weapon before hiding it." He closed his notebook. "The case is solved. James will be held for trial." Poirot's pale eyebrows rose. "Permit me, Inspector," he said softly, "to ask one question. How did James acquire the violet-inked napkin? His quarters have no ink pot." The inspector hesitated. "He was seen near the conservatory, where Lady Mirabell's stationery sits." "And yet," Poirot replied, "the conservatory is locked from the inside, and the key is kept on Lady Mirabell's desk. James would have had no legitimate reason to enter that room without detection." He turned to Lady Mirabell, who shrank beneath his gaze. "Inspector, might we test Lord Archibald's claim of observing James in the hallway just before the murder?" Poirot asked, producing his tape. "Measure." "His account discrepancy. Fear can warp one's sense of time." "Minor?" Poirot asked, eyes narrowing. "Then how do you account for the fact that the glove fibers on the weapon match the Queen's Own Regiment gloves that James does not possess? The gloves he wore were plain black leather, brought from home." James swallowed again. I found the regiment's gloves under the piano bench." "Exactly," Poirot exclaimed. "He found them there, planted. I measured the impressions they left, too large for his hands, far too small for Marchant's. The murderer used those gloves to frame James." A ripple of astonishment went through the group. The inspector looked from Poirot to the footman, then back again. "Monsieur Poirot, Are you suggesting James is innocent? I am certain of it, Poirot said. He gestured to the violet-inked napkin. Notice the pattern of ink splotches, irregular at the edges, as though the napkin was folded unevenly when someone pressed it against a dripping quill. This could only happen in haste, and only by someone familiar with Lady Mirabel's handwriting habits, someone who writes regularly in violet. All eyes turned to Lady Mirabel. Her composure cracked, her fingers trembled upon her gloves. I had nothing to do with it, she whispered. Poirot's little grey cells whirred. Yet you sit at the centre of this web, madam. You possess the key to the conservatory and the stationery. You knew Miss Ashworth guarded both your letters and the maestro's manuscript. You had every reason to remove evidence from your study and implicate an innocent servant. And you had every reason to believe the authorities would seize upon a thief's confession rather than pursue the truth. Lady Mirabel's head bowed, tears glistening in her eyes. Lord Archibald cleared his throat. My sister, it was to protect the family name. She nearly lost everything. Our reputation, the estate's future. Eleanor Montague gasped. You risked murder to conceal a simple scandal? Sir Rupert Vance frowned. Scandal often begets scandal, but murder— Poirot held up a hand. Not so fast, Sir Rupert. We are not finished. Though the inspector here finds it convenient to close the case, I find it untenable that a grown man like James, terrified though he was, could mastermind such a complex deception, nor that he could commit murder with such precision and then carefully remove every scrap of evidence from his quarters. Our first lead is false. He turned to Inspector Simmons. Release James immediately. Then, Inspector, we continue our investigation, examining Lady Mirabel's study, the conservatory, and the contract files. For now, let this be a lesson. Never trust an alibi that stands on haste and fear, nor a confession born of panic. The inspector bowed. Very well, Monsieur Poirot. I will hold James in protective custody, pending further inquiry. As the footman was escorted from the room, gorgeously uniformed yet broken, the other suspects exchanged uneasy glances. Poirot squared his shoulders. Mes amis, the true villain remains among us, one more cunning than the rest. We press on. And so, amid exhaled sighs of relief and the hushed reassembly of evidence, Thornwood Hall's investigation advanced beyond its first misstep, guided by Poirot's unwavering conviction that the simplest solution is seldom the correct one. Chapter 7. The Psychological Game. That afternoon, a thin slant of sun warmed the marble floor of Thornwood Hall's grand vestibule, but inside, the air remained cool with suspicion. By Poirot's instruction, each guest was to return to the music salon at precisely 3 o'clock. No explanations were given beyond a curt note. Join me for further inquiry. I arrived early, notebook in hand, and found Poirot standing before the Steinway, his posture serene, yet his eyes alive with anticipation. "Ah, Hastings," he greeted me, inclining his head. "Now comes the game of minds. Observe closely, my friend, for in this hour we set traps with words rather than steel." He handed me a small stack of index cards. "Each suspect shall receive a prompt, carefully worded, to provoke a truthful reaction or an involuntary tremor." He placed the cards on the piano, 5 in all, 1 for each of our remaining suspects: Lady Mirabel, Lord Archibald, Helena Montague, Sir Rupert Vance, and Colin Marchant. Poirot tapped the Steinway's ivory keys lightly, as though testing the readiness of the stage. "One by one," he instructed. "We shall entice them here with the pretext of a private consultation. but the questions they answer will be our instruments of revelation. At 3 o'clock sharp, the door opened to admit Lady Mirabelle. She paused at the threshold, her face ghostly pale, but offered a trembling curtsy when Poirot beckoned her forward. "Madame," Poirot began, his voice smooth as satin, "please read this aloud." He handed her the first card. In Lady Mirabelle's delicate script appeared the phrase, "Tell me why you asked Miss Ashworth to remove the maestro's penknife from the conservatory." Lady Mirabelle drew in a sharp breath. Her gloved fingers fluttered as she unfolded the card and read. A faint quiver caught in her throat. "I did not ask her to remove it," she protested softly. "I only suggested it might be safer in a locked drawer, away from prying eyes." Her gaze flicked to the torn manuscript on the piano, then back to Poirot. "Surely, monsieur, that was a prudent measure." "Prudence, yes," Poirot conceded, "if your motive were protection. But consider, Miss Ashworth believed she served the maestro's best interests by safeguarding both the manuscript and his personal effects. Why divert her attention from one to the other at such a critical hour?" Lady Mirabelle's lips parted, then closed, as though she struggled for composure. She bowed deeply and retreated, leaving a faint scent of violet. Next entered Lord Archibald, his gait hesitant. Poirot handed him the second card. "Read this," he said, "and speak freely." Archibald inhaled and began, "Explain the ledger you instructed Miss Ashworth to destroy rather than hand to the authorities." A spike of color crept into Archibald's cheeks. He swallowed audibly. "That ledger contained no more than private family calculations, debts owed by the maestro to my bankers. I feared its publication would ruin his reputation, and thus my own." His voice cracked. "I meant only to spare him embarrassment." "Embarrassment can kill reputations," Poirot observed gently, "but not young lives. Why not trust the law to handle mere debts?" Archibald's shoulders slumped. "Because the law is slow and gossip swift. By the time justice was served, the damage would be done." He bowed his head and exited, footfalls echoing on stone. Helena Montague arrived next, her eyes dark with anxiety. Poirot extended the third card. She read, "Describe the contents, but if that letter had become public, my career, and Cabot's, would have suffered." She clenched her fists. "I only meant to protect both our livelihoods." Poirot nodded. "Protection is a noble motive, but at what cost? Miss Ashworth discovered those letters and the missing pages simultaneously. You feared her discovery more than you valued her safety." Helena's eyes brimmed with tears. She bowed and left, swift as a startled dove. Sir Rupert Vance advanced with measured steps. Poirot presented the fourth card. With cool precision, Vance read, "Clarify why you added the violet ink clause to the financing contract after Miss Ashworth had examined it." Sir Rupert's expression stiffened. He cleared his throat before speaking. "I sought to formalize the maestro's obligations in writing," he said, his voice level. "The violet ink signified an amendment agreed upon in person, nothing more." He paused. "Do you doubt my integrity, monsieur?" Poirot inclined his head. "Not integrity, sir, but truth. The amendment appeared only after Celia discovered something in the margin. You wish to conceal that discovery beneath the guise of lawful amendment." Sir Rupert's jaw tightened, but he offered no further defense. He bowed and withdrew. Finally, Colin Marchant stepped forward, his military bearing intact, but tension evident in the set of his shoulders. Poirot placed the fifth card in his hand. Marchant read, "Account for why you tested the alarm twice before the concert. but informed the housekeeper only of minor electrical issues. Martian's voice was clipped as he answered. I assessed the mechanism and found it functional. I noted only a loose wire in the conservatory lamp. The alarm itself required no attention. He met Poirot's gaze. I served my country. I do not conspire in petty dramatics. Poirot tapped the card lightly. Yet you, of all people, admit to knowing the lamp wiring, a device that failed precisely when needed. You instructed the housekeeper to disregard the lamp issue, but you let the alarm's fallibility remain. Why protect the lamp, but not the alarm? Marchant's eyes flickered. Because the lamp was in constant use. The alarm only needed to function once. He paused, then added quietly, I did not want to alarm the guests with talk of faulty wiring. It would create unrest. Unrest, yes, Poirot murmured. But fear is the tool of murderers. He watched Marchant's gaze drift to the metal powder on the windowsill, traces I had noted earlier but not mentioned. My friend Hastings discovered the same metal powder in your study's corner, where you polished your medals. Could this powder, do you think, serve to clean more than metal? Marchant's composure cracked for a heartbeat. He bowed and departed without another word. When the door closed, Poirot turned to me, his face lit with triumph. Observe, Hastings. Each suspect revealed a fragment of truth they would rather hide. We have admission of diversion, destruction, theft, amendment, and concealment, but none confessed to murder. Their defenses fracture under subtle pressure. He swept the index cards from the piano, sliding them into his pocket. Now, mon ami, we prepare for the individual interrogations. We have laid bare their motives and teased out lesser deceptions. Soon, we shall pursue the ultimate lie, the lie that led to bloodshed. As we left the music salon, the afternoon light behind us softened, and a wreath of tension followed in our wake. The psychological game was in full motion, and Poirot's little grey cells were poised to deliver the final checkmate. Chapter 8. A secondary mystery. Late that evening, the hush of Thornwood Hall's corridors was shattered by a piercing shriek emanating from the dining room. Poirot and I were reviewing our notes in the music salon when the housekeeper, her face ashen, burst through the door. Monseigneur, madame, a terrible thing has happened, she panted. Sir Rupert Vance, he is ill, collapsed at the table, and the maestro's letter, his private letter from Miss Ashworth's diary, has vanished from the locked drawer in Lady Mirabelle's study. With that, Poirot was instantly alert. He extended a steadying arm to the trembling housekeeper. Lead us to Sir Rupert, he instructed, and then to the study at once. We hurried first to the dining room, where Sir Rupert lay propped in a chair, his face ghostly pale. A half-finished glass of claret tilted at his elbow, crimson droplets staining the white damask cloth. The footman knelt at his side, pressing a linen napkin to Rupert's lips, where a sheen of sweat glistened. Poirot crouched beside him, his keen eyes noting every detail. "How long has he been like this?" he asked the housekeeper. "Only moments, monsieur. I saw him raise his glass and drink." Then he slumped forward with a groan. Poirot gently prized the napkin aside and examined Sir Rupert's tongue and gums. "He drank from that glass," he murmured. "And yet the wine itself remains untouched beyond a few sips. Bring me the bottle." A footman retrieved the decanter from the sideboard. Poirot sniffed its contents, and then withdrew a watchmaker's loop from his waistcoat pocket. He examined the rim of the glass, then the inside of the decanter's neck. "Look here, Hastings," he said, pointing. "A faint residue, a fine, pale powder, not something one adds to wine by accident." Inspector Simmons arrived, having been summoned by the housekeeper. Poirot handed him the decanter. "Have this analyzed for traces of poison at once," he instructed. "Meanwhile, we must secure the study." We left Sir Rupert in the housekeeper's care and proceeded to Lady Mirabel's study, where the grand mahogany desk stood with its drawers locked. Poirot produced a master key and opened the top drawer. Inside, nestled between violet ink letters and family photographs, was an empty envelope embossed with the maestro's seal. "The private letter," Poirot said quietly. "Gone." Lady Mirabel, summoned by another footman, appeared at the door, her face pale but composed. "Monsieur Poirot, I swear I locked the drawer myself this morning," she said. "I had intended to read that letter in private. Miss Ashworth brought it to me, but I did not open it." Poirot nodded. "And yet someone has both stolen it and attempted to poison Sir Rupert. 2 crimes in one night. Remarkable." He turned to me. "Hastings, fetch the inspector and ask him to guard the study." Moments later, Inspector Simmons stood before us. Poirot handed him the empty envelope. "See that no one enters or leaves this room unaccompanied. Nothing must be disturbed." The inspector bowed and posted a guard outside the study door. Poirot then led us back to the dining room, where Sir Rupert, still drowsy, lay with one hand clasped by Lady Mirabel and the other trembling upon his chest. Helena Montague and Lord Archibald hovered anxiously nearby, while Colin Marchant stood with arms crossed, his face inscrutable. Poirot inclined his head. "Were you aware that your contract file, where you kept the amendment clause in violet ink, was placed beside your plate this evening?" Sir Rupert frowned. "Number Y left the folder in my sitting room." He looked at the table. "I see it now, upon the silver tray next to my glass, but I do not recall moving it." Helena gasped. "Someone must have planted it there to implicate you further." "Exactly," Poirot said. "Who would benefit most from Sir Rupert's incapacitation and the disappearance of the letter?" He turned to the group. "Who knew of Sir Rupert's presence here tonight and of his habit of reviewing that folder after dinner?" Lord Archibald spoke first. "I was summoned to attend to a matter in the conservatory, something about the lamp. By the time I returned, there was shouting." Colin Marchant nodded. "I was in the library, examining the alarm wiring as you requested. I heard nothing until the scream." Helena said, "I was in my room, nursing a headache. I heard voices downstairs but assumed it was housekeeping." Lady Mirabel's composure wavered. "I was in my study, preparing tea. When I heard Sir Rupert cry out, I rushed here." Poirot studied her carefully. "Madame, did you not ask to see the private letter tonight? You wished to confront the author, possibly to retrieve it." Her lips trembled. "I only intended to ask for its return before anyone else could see its contents." Poirot nodded, then turned to Inspector Simmons. "Conduct a search of Lady Mirabel's study for any sign of forced entry or concealed compartments, and examine the lining of the envelope. It may bear a fingerprint." As the inspector departed, Poirot returned to Sir Rupert's side. He pressed a finger to the footman's napkin still between Rupert's lips. "Hastings, retrieve the footman's gloves. We must compare the powder residue." I fetched the gloves from Poirot's case. He held them next to the decanter neck and found matching flecks of the pale powder. This substance, palladium as we suspected, was used to mask blood on the Persian runner. Now we see it was reused to mask the taste of poison, scattering just enough to throw off suspicion. Lord Archibald swayed. Helena reached to steady him. Poirot's gaze swept the assembled group. "Our murderer is audacious. They committed a second crime without fear of detection. They know Sir Rupert's habits, Lady Mirabel's study, and the location of the private letter. They move like a ghost through these halls." He turned to me. "We must act quickly, Hastings. A second victim, or a destroyed piece of evidence, could tip the balance. Secure the library, the study, the music salon, and the conservatory. No one leaves these rooms without your notice." As the suspects dispersed under the inspector's escort, the hall fell into uneasy quiet once more. Poirot stood alone by the dining table, gazing at the decanter and the empty envelope. His little grey cells were already weaving the threads of this tangled web, poised to uncover the dark hand that orchestrated both murder and attempted murder under the guise of art and propriety. Chapter 9. Hidden Connections. The following morning, Thornwood Hall stirred with an uneasy hush, as though every stone and shutter held its breath. I joined Hercule Poirot in the conservatory, the air heavy with the scent of ferns and orchids, where he had arranged our latest array of evidence upon a marble-topped table. The morning sun, filtered through stained glass, cast kaleidoscopic patterns across the floor, an apt backdrop for the secrets we were about to unveil. "Mon ami," Poirot began, his voice low and urgent, "we have examined motives individually, but now we must investigate the ties that bind these suspects to one another. Connections may reveal alliances or betrayals hidden beneath courtesy and civility." He indicated a small chart he had sketched on a scrap of paper. Lines connected names and events. Lady Mirabel to Sir Rupert via the financing agreement. Helena to Cabot through her threatened correspondence. Archibald to Marchant by virtue of military service. Marchant to the manuscript via his security duties. Each line suggested a bond, but one in particular caught our attention. A faint, dotted line linking Helena Montague and Lord Archibald. "Why," Poirot asked, "did Lady Helena write that she feared exposure by Miss Ashworth, and yet confide that fear to a member of the family rather than to the maestro, who informed Lord Archibald of the rival company's letter hidden among the maestro's papers?" I recalled Helena's trembling confession. She said only that she wished to protect Cabot's reputation and her own, but never mentioned anyone else. "Precisely," Poirot said, "which suggests someone whispered to Archibald of Helena's plight, leaking that letter's existence. Such knowledge would deepen his own motive to control Celia's discoveries." He tapped the chart. "We must trace that whisper." He produced the maestro's missing private letter, now recovered from a secret compartment in his study, its seal broken but its contents intact. Poirot removed a folded sheet from its envelope and read aloud, "My dearest Celia, I entrust you with this confession. I once composed a dedication in this concerto for one who then betrayed me. That dedication, expressed in violet ink, names the very person who now seeks to profit from my work and ruin my name. Guard it well, and trust no one but your most devoted friend. R.C." Poirot's finger traced the words, "Betray me, and profit from my work." Our blackmailer used this letter to threaten both the maestro and Miss Ashworth. But who profits from Cabot's ruin, and who betrayed him earlier? He folded the letter thoughtfully and addressed me. "Hastings, fetch the ledger of financial transactions from Sir Rupert's contract files. I wish to see if any payment or tribute aligns with the betrayal in the past." I hurried to the library and returned with a leather-bound ledger, its pages filled with neat columns of figures and annotations. Poirot opened it to the section dated 5 years prior, when Cabot's previous concerto had debuted. "Observe here," he murmured, pointing to an entry. "Payment of £2,000 to H.M. Personal Services. initialed by Archibald. He tapped the line. H.M. Helena Montague, a substantial sum paid years ago. What service did the actress provide to the maestro then, and why would he record it under a pseudonym? I considered the timing, a secret payment hidden in plain sight. Could it have been a commission for a private composition, or hush money for a personal indiscretion? Poirot's moustaches twitched. Either is possible, Hastings. But note that Archibald authorized the payment through Cabot's family coffers, suggesting Lady Mirabel's complicity or at least her acquiescence. He closed the ledger and added the notation to his chart. Helena right arrow Archibald, financial link. This is our first hidden connection, a bond of transaction, but perhaps also of scandal. Next, Poirot directed us to examine the security log in Martian's notebook, which we had obtained during tabled at that hour. I furrowed my brow. He said he tested the lamp wiring, but midnight is an unusual time for maintenance. Indeed, Poirot agreed. Martian may have sought to examine something else. Perhaps the safe containing the maestro's private correspondence, or perhaps to meet someone clandestinely. He marked this connection. Marchant, Cabot, midnight visit. The final line on Poirot's chart linked Sir Rupert and Helena, a connection we had not yet fully explored. Poirot reviewed the contract files and noticed an endorsement in the margin beside Helena's performance rights. Deduction applied to endorse compensation to H.M. for lost royalties. The margin bore a flourish in violet ink. He paid Helena for some breach of contract, Poirot said. But that breach was never public. He sought to conceal their dispute. Yet it surfaced in the maestro's manuscript when Miss Ashworth examined it. I considered this tangled web. Helena owed Cabot, paid by Rupert. Archibald paid Helena, concealed by Mirabel. Marchant visited Cabot at midnight. Their relationships overlapped like interlaced cords. The question remained, which of these bonds carried the fatal betrayal? Poirot stood and surveyed the conservatory's glass roof. Mes amis, he announced, we see that each suspect is entwined with Cabot, financially, emotionally, or professionally. None stand apart, and the murderer exploited these connections, using them as instruments of diversion and deceit. He paused, then turned to me. Now, Hastings, we shall set a trap to reveal alliances. We prepare a letter, signed R.C., implying the maestro intended to publicly expose past betrayals at tonight's gathering. We send each suspect a copy, blindly attributing it to the maestro. The one who responds with panic or fury will betray their complicity. I nodded, understanding his plan. By threatening to unmask them all, we force the guilty hand to act. Exactamo. Poirot smiled, his eyes alight. For in the crucible of fear, hidden connections will fracture. Then we shall see who stands alone and who falls. As we left the conservatory to enact our ruse, the sun dipped behind storm clouds, casting Thornwood Hall into shadow. Amid the shifting light and the labyrinth of relationships, Poirot's little grey cells plotted the next move, weaving the threads of hidden connections into the tapestry of truth. Tonight, the snare would be set, and among this circle of suspects, the guilty would reveal themselves. Chapter 10. Poirot's Secret Clue. Before dawn the following day, the hush of Thornwood Hall was broken only by the steady ticking of the grandfather clock in the music salon. Hercule Poirot and I had taken refuge there, preparing the trap he devised the previous evening. A set of forged letters, each purportedly signed R.C., and threatening public exposure of past betrayals at tonight's gathering. The letters lay stacked on the polished piano, one for each suspect, sealed with Maestro Cabot's distinctive wax emblem. "Mon ami," Poirot whispered, "observe how the mind plays upon fear." He tapped the letter at Helena Montague's spot. "Notice that each refers to measure 87 of the unpublished concerto, a point at which a hidden dedication resides. We use this to unsettle them." He eyed me keenly. "But I have discovered a detail so small, it eluded everyone but the keenest ear." I leaned forward. "What is it, Poirot?" He ran a fingertip along the piano's ivory keys. "Measure 87, as it appears in the original manuscript, begins with a pianissimo in the cello line. Yet our letters quote a fortissimo entry." He paused to let the inconsistency settle. No one who handled the true manuscript, and thus heard its intended dynamics, could make such an error. Only someone who referred to the published score, which misnumbers and fortifies that passage, would speak of it so boldly. I frowned. "And published scores are available in London music shops, not in Miss Ashworth's guarded studio." "Exactly," Poirot said, his eyes alight. "The murderer illicitly acquired a published edition rather than the maestro's original. That tells us the culprit never possessed the manuscript itself, only its public form." He folded his arms. "I keep this secret until the final moment. It shall be my key." He placed the letters carefully into 5 ivory envelopes, each addressed in a neat hand. "Now, Hastings, deliver these to their recipients. Knock, slide the envelope under the door, and withdraw silently." His instructions were crisp, his mind alight with anticipation. I carried the envelopes down the corridor. At each door I knocked thrice, then slipped in the letter, first to Lady Mirabelle, then to Lord Archibald, on to Helena Montague, Sir Rupert Vance, and finally Colin Marchant. Each envelope's wax seal bore the maestro's crest, but I noted subtle differences in thickness, a detail Poirot would later exploit. Returning to the salon, I found Poirot inspecting the seal impressions under his magnifying glass. "Notice," he murmured, "that the embossing is slightly shallower on 2 envelopes. A worn seal ring, one of the pair belonging to the maestro, but not the only one. Intriguing." He pocketed the letters and gestured to the piano bench. "We wait now, Hastings. Observe their reactions at luncheon. The guilty will betray themselves through word or deed." At midday, the luncheon bell rang through the hall. We joined the others in the dining room, where a long mahogany table was laid out with fine silverware and crystal. Each place bore an envelope, sealed as Poirot had designed. The guests settled, exchanging anxious glances over salad and consommé. Lady Mirabelle was first. She lifted her envelope with trembling fingers, broke the seal, and drew out the letter. Her reading went unnoticed for a moment, then her face blanched, and she pressed a hand to her bosom. When she spoke, her voice was tight. "He misquotes my dear Roland's score. Surely this is a cruel mockery." She looked around, eyes wary. Next, Lord Archibald sliced at a roll with unexpected force, tore open his letter, and read. His jaw clenched. He tapped the paper sharply on the table. "Measure 87, fortissimo," he growled. "Ridiculous. My niece guarded the original. Who would dare misquote it?" Helena Montague held her breath as she opened hers. A flush rose in her cheeks. She glanced at the others, then at Poirot, her eyes brimming. She folded the letter into a neat square and slipped it into her purse. "He does not know Clara's score," she whispered. "Someone lies." Sir Rupert Vance, impeccably composed, undid his seal and read in silence. Then he set the letter beside his plate, untouched. His eyes narrowed. Finally, he spoke in measured tones. This must be the work of the maestro's enemies. Measure 87, fortissimo. I have only a published copy. Perhaps I misunderstood.